we're here with Australia's Federal Minister for Climate Change and Energy, with over 21 years' experience in Parliament, the Honourable Chris Bowen. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my great pleasure, Sam.
I live in Australia.
If you're born in Australia, you're a winner. We are the best country in the world.
Now, with nuclear, what's the problem with it?
The problem with it is it's too expensive and takes too long. There'll be some people out there who don't like it at all for moral reasons, and I'm not one of them. If it works, it works for Australia, but it doesn't work for Australia. You do one ChatGPT search, that uses 10 times more electricity than a Google search.
I've heard that much amount of water as well.
Yep, because you've got to keep the AI and the data centres cool.
Now, with energy prices being so high, why is that?
You see it on social media, if renewables are so cheap, why are my prices going up? The true answer to that is because we don't yet have enough renewables. The thing about solar and wind is they don't send a bill, right? Once you've built them, you've got the resource. The sun doesn't send a bill, the wind doesn't send an invoice. We are going to need more electricity in Australia. That's just a statement of fact.
So you'd be used to dealing with the heat?
Yeah. When you're in politics in particular, you've just got to get broad shoulders and just deal with it. Sometimes you've got to make urgent decisions. Two things. Work out who you can trust for advice, and then you go.
Mining's important for Australia. Are you a big supporter of mining and digging up these minerals?
And we're going to need more of it. Mining's got a great future in Australia. It'll change, but Australia will be a mining country forever.
Today we're here with Australia's Federal Minister for Climate Change and Energy, with over 21 years' experience in Parliament and father of two, the Honourable Chris Bowen. Thanks for coming on.
Oh, my great pleasure, Sam. Thanks for having us on.
Now, I'm surprised you're on, given the Sydney Morning Herald said we only get about 4,000 views.
Well, mate, when you're in the public eye, you get all sorts of free feedback and advice.
Yep.
And some of it will be accurate and some of it won't be. But, you get very used to it. Free character assessments, free advice on how to do your job. And sometimes I find the more successful you are, the more free feedback there is.
The more they talk, it's so funny because they didn't take into account any of the short form. And
no, well, you know much more about this than I do, but I reckon most people don't listen to podcasts via YouTube. I reckon there's other channels.
The short form content.
So I reckon you're doing all right for yourself.
Yeah, well, thank you. So you'd be used to dealing with the heat?
When you're in politics in particular, you just got to get broad shoulders and just deal with it. And, when I was a younger minister, this is my second time as a minister, so when I was a younger minister in the last Labor government, I used to get, more upset about bad publicity and stress about it more. Now it's just part of the job, and you got certain newspapers you open up and it's front page story and you go, okay, shrug the shoulders, turn the page, and you think, people know what to think. They don't need to be told by a newspaper what to think.
Yeah.
And so you just get more used to it, stronger about it, and it's just part of life. And sometimes they'll be right. Sometimes you haven't got something right, and that's fair enough. You've got to take the good with the bad. Sometimes it'll just be a complete invention, and they've just got an agenda to run, and you go, oh well, no one's going to believe that because it's not true. And other times you think, oh well, I'm just going to respond, and here's what I'm going to say about it, and you just deal with it, and then. It's tomorrow's fish and chip wrappers, people, it doesn't hang around.
Comes and
life
goes.
Moves on, yeah.
So when you see something, even if it's not right, do you normally just ignore it?
Well, it depends what it is. There are things that are not right all the time in newspapers, all the time. And, you get columns and there's a great deal of certainty and they have facts and you think, it's just not true, it's just not right. Now, sometimes you just ignore it and it just, no one notices, goes away. Sometimes you think, no, that's so important, they've got that so wrong that I'm going to put out a statement or a social media thing and just correct it. You really got to use your gut. And in politics, I find your most important organ is your gut. You've got to go with your judgment.
Your intuition.
Your intuition. You've got to think, actually, I could think about this all day, but my gut says this has got to be dealt with, or this is not really a big thing. And you get better at that as you go, and you're more experienced. Yeah.
So, having a lot of pressure in your role, what skills have you learned to deal with that? And I suppose deal with the good and bad publicity as well.
Yeah, well, you've got to, again, keep it in perspective. I find for myself, knowing lots about history helps, like learning about history, reading about history, and reading about people who've been in your shoes before and realising that they went through all this crap, but you don't really remember it now. You remember the good things they did in their career or their achievements, but it's never easy for anyone. So I find stepping back, looking at it in context, going, well, this is really hard what we're trying to do here, and nothing worth doing is easy really, or someone else would have done it, so we're just going to keep going. I find that stepping back and looking at it in a more long-term historical context, for me, that's what helps me get through. There are other things I do, like I try and keep a bit fit, I try and exercise. That's sort of Chris time as well. That's time out early in the morning where I'm working, perhaps I might be listening to the radio or something, but I'm also just in my own space and thinking about the day, and that helps for me, manage the stress of it. Yeah.
Yes, and talking about history, you have some of your family members on the wall behind you, and
Yeah.
you were saying earlier that helps you put things in perspective.
Yeah, so I keep my pictures of my great uncles up there. They were in World War One, and what's interesting about them, particularly, one of them was killed in the trenches. One of them survived the war, but they were German. Their surname was Kranz, Kranz, but they'd moved to England just before the war, and they fought for the English. And so obviously they decided, this is my country now, and I'm all in. And indeed, one of them, Uncle Heine, as we call him in the family, he gave his life for his new country. And you think, what did they go through? They knew they were fighting their cousins. Their mates in the trenches probably didn't trust them entirely because they were German.
Your own friends in the trenches.
We'll never know entirely what they went through, but those pictures are more than 100 years old, and they've come to me and the family, and they're very special to me. So I put them up here in my office, just a little reminder that everyone's got to deal with crap, and some people have got to deal with particularly bad stuff, and they dealt with so much in their lives. And so if I'm dealing with a bad story in the Telegraph, it's not really much compared to what they had to go through.
Really good perspective.
Yeah.
It's what my coaches tried to tell me when I used to get upset training when I was younger. I used to get really frustrated when dives weren't going my way, and he said, just have perspective. And when I was younger, I didn't even understand it.
Yeah.
But as I got older, it's like, I live in Australia.
Best country in the world.
That's like, even that's a win. That's probably
Absolutely.
the luckiest place to be in the world.
If you're born in Australia, you're a winner. Without being too jingoistic about it or nationalistic about it, we are the best country in the world. And if you need a reminder of that, go overseas. Lots of very great countries, but we've been blessed with so much in Australia, and we just got to really remind ourselves of that, I reckon.
I always love to travel, but I love to come home.
Absolutely.
Now, through your career, you've been there for 21 years. What valuable lessons have you learned about leadership throughout that time?
Well, I think, Sam, there's a few, and we've touched on some of them. You take that longer-term perspective. You don't get too stressed about the short-term, something that feels really big today. By next week, you'll be going, what was that thing I was dealing with last week again? So you've got to just keep that in perspective. I think, for me, the key is, one, working out what's the right thing to do, and then you work back from that. So a lot of people, think about political tactics or what have you. Actually, the bigger question is, well, what's the right call here? And then how do we get there? Step back. And where do you want to be in 3 years' time or 4 years' time? And then work out how you're going to get there, rather than what am I going to do tonight or tomorrow to deal with this issue. There's got to be a bit of that. Obviously, you're dealing with issues and criticism, but try and take a longer-term point of view. Also, know what you don't know and what's the best way of finding out. So, at the moment, I'm a Minister for Energy, and there's a lot of energy experts out there, right? And, 5 years ago, I wasn't the Minister for Energy, so you have to learn about the new area and, importantly, work out, well, who's a great source of advice on these questions and build up a group. And then get the best out of people around you, in the office or the department. There's a really strong, I like to run a really strong system where people should tell me what they think. And that will sometimes telling me I'm absolutely wrong about something. Yeah. And, as I say, I don't pay you to tell me I'm right, so tell me when I'm wrong. And the sort of quid pro quo is, in the office or the department, everyone knows, well, I'm going to tell him when he's wrong, but ultimately his call. It's his name on the front door. It's his name in the newspaper.
Yeah. We'll let you know the information if you want to go ahead with it.
He's got to own it, right? And he's got to make the call. And that's the way the system works. So it's my call ultimately, and any politician's call. It's our name. We've got to make the call. But I'll be right as much as I'm wrong, and I need all the advice and weigh it up. And again, sometimes it just goes to the gut, and I listen to all the views in the office or the department. Say I hear what everyone said, and everyone's got a good point to make. But ultimately, my gut says this, and this is what we've got. This is what we're going to have to do.
And you've got to own it. If you make a decision,
absolutely,
you can back whatever happens after that.
You've got to for right or for wrong, you've got to own it. I won't go into details, but, recently, there's just an issue I was managing, and I took advice, and it didn't work out quite the way I wanted. And the guy who gave me the advice, felt bad about it. I said, no, it was my call. It was my decision. You talked me into it, yes, but it was my call. It's my responsibility. I own it. And you've got to do that in politics.
I feel like you've got to do that in everything in life.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
If you take full responsibility for it,
absolutely,
then you can at least know that you can even change the outcome. But if you put it on someone else, You know, it feels like nothing's ever in your hands.
Absolutely.
When it comes to a typical challenge you'd face in the day-to-day life, can you tell me about a problem you've had recently and how you solved it?
So, again, in this job, I mean, we are running the biggest economic transformation in Australian history. It's about the environment and climate, but it's also a massive economic transformation. We're changing the way we make energy for our country and indeed how we help the rest of the world make energy. So it's not smooth, right? You don't lay out a plan and it all follows. You've got to manage these changes. But also, part of the challenge is working out, well, what's worth it? You know, I could spend a lot of time on this problem and it's going to make 0.1% of a difference, but I can spend my time over here and it's going to be tough, it's going to be politically difficult, but it's going to have payoff. So a good example of that is, you know, we recently brought in new standards for cars in Australia. They're called the New Vehicle Efficiency Standards. It had been tried like 4 or 5 times over the last 20 years. It's really hard because it's controversial and it's easy to lie about it, frankly, and say, yeah.
When you bring in new standards, what does that look like? How do you do it? How do you set them out?
Well, you start from scratch. You go, okay, how are we going to do this? Then you've got to talk to your colleagues and say, listen, you know, to the Prime Minister and your cabinet colleagues, this is going to be tough. It's going to be a fight. The other side's going to go off. They're going to say all sorts of things, but it's worth it. You know, it's worth it because, you know, in this case, Australia and Russia were the only 2 countries without these standards. So we were being sent bad cars, not efficient cars, using too much petrol, not getting the best EVs, not getting the best hybrids, and we were missing out. And so it was a big fight. It was very hard to get it through Parliament because it's easy to say no to something. It's easy to say, well, I don't like that because that's going to put the price of cars up. Well, it's not true. That's the easy thing. The really hard thing in politics is getting a change, which you know is worth it. You know here it's worth it, but you know it can be misrepresented, and it's going to be a big fight. And you just got to make the call that it's worth it, get on with it, put your armour on, out you go. And, you know, you need to build coalitions. So, you know, we have to get it through Parliament. The government doesn't have all the votes in Parliament. We've got to get it through. You've got to talk to the crossbenchers and say, well, look, this is really important. And sometimes you get people go, yeah, it's good, but you haven't gone far enough, so I'm not voting for it. You go, well, yeah, but I'm taking a step forward here, guys. Like, come with me. Yeah. So you got to build that coalition. Yeah.
Now, I got an electric car recently, an Xpeng. It's my first electric car.
Yeah.
I actually love it.
They're great to drive, aren't they? You know, the thing about EVs and hybrids, and we're all on a journey. Some people will go through a hybrid, some people will go straight to EV, depending on where they live, how they travel, etc. All on a journey.
And you got a Tesla at the moment?
I've got a Tesla, and the thing about EVs is, of course, they're much better for the environment. They're also much cheaper to run. You know, you don't have to service it. Yeah. There's only a few moving parts. There's not all the...
And no petrol?
No petrol. So the running costs are so much lower. And then they're so much fun to drive.
They are, aren't they?
Yeah, no,
they're fun.
Fun, quiet, and fast off the lights.
That's what I was going to say.
Sometimes, you know, I'm not much of a revhead, but you pull up at the lights and this, you know, guy pulls up next to you and clearly he looks down at you and thinks, oh, EV, and, you know, revs up his big V8. You think, okay, mate, all right. They're still seeing the lights when you're gone. That's right. Yeah, that's right.
That's one of my favourite parts about the pickup.
Yeah.
Like, my old car was a Honda Jazz, so, you know, no buff car.
Yeah.
But I was going to drive it until I got.
Well, the only downside is they're so smooth and so fast. You've really got to be careful because you can be doing 100 in, you know, off the lights before you know it, and because it's so smooth, you haven't realised. Yeah. So you got to be like, it takes a little bit of getting used to. That you can be driving a lot faster than you think you are. Yeah. Because they're just such smooth rides.
I found that too when I first started driving an electric car. I was driving faster without realising. Yeah. Because you don't hear the engine.
No.
When you're going up.
No, you don't hear a thing, and it's just so responsive. And, you know, you look down and think, oh, you know, I'm going too fast here.
Let's slow down.
Yeah, that's right.
I do love the pickup. The only challenge I've found is the infrastructure for charging them.
Yep.
Because I don't have a charger at home, and the chargers at shopping centres, I've never seen one empty.
Yep. So I would say here we've got a lot more work to do. So we have done well. So in the last 3 years, we've tripled the number of chargers, public chargers available. But also the number of EVs has gone right up, right? So we're not currently keeping up with that demand, so we need to do more. So now we have one charger, public charger, per 68 EVs, and internationally they're at 1 per 11.
Okay.
So I would say, yeah, we've done okay, and we're rolling them out, and it's a hard job, right? So we're rolling them out in parts of Australia where there's no electricity. So how do you know, that's a tough ask, right? We're doing it. Yeah. We're doing it in partnership with the NRMA. because you want to give people comfort that if you're driving from, Sydney to Perth or Hobart to Darwin or wherever you want to go, there's going to be a charger. And we're doing that. We're putting one charger once every 150 k's, but some very remote parts of Australia with no electricity, so it's hard to do. But then you've got the other challenge, like you mentioned, you don't have a charger
at home. Because I live in an apartment.
I was going to say,
They said it was like $1,500 in legal fees just to get a charger in, and then another $1,500 for the installation.
Apartments are a challenge, and partly we need to do better at that, and partly that's how stratas work, which is state, not federal, not trying to shift blame, but we're responsible for different things, and partly that is doing what we're doing more of now is more curbside charging, so telegraph pole charging, so that where you live, okay, it might just be too complicated to get a charger in your garage in the basement, but there'll be 5 chargers on the telegraph poles in your street maybe. And if you go to Europe, for example, that's everywhere, and we've got a lot of catching up to do. So we're working with the state governments, we're working with councils and the private sector to get much more of that done.
To get more, even shopping centres and car parks, they could have a lot more, so you can just go in, charge it here and there. Because it only takes like an hour once it's in to go nearly 100%.
Well, it can take less than that, if you're on, 40 or 50 or something, and you just pop in, do your grocery shopping, come out, you're fully charged. Some of that will happen. It's a chicken and egg thing, right? So the more EVs we get, the more incentive there is for people like shopping centres and restaurants and hotels to put in a charger, because you'll say, well, I'll go to Coles because they've got a charger there. I'm not going to Woolworths down the road because I can't charge while I'm there. So they'll be coming in more and more an incentive for them to do it. Or you might be taking a road trip and you might ring up the hotel and say, I want to book in for a night. Do you have an EV charger? They say no. You say, okay, I'm going to ring someone else, and they say yes, and you book in there. And as the EV sales go up, which they're doing, some of that will happen.
Becomes more competitive.
Yeah, totally.
Which is good. So we have 68 EVs per one charger?
Yeah, on average, yeah.
And then what do we want to bring that down to?
Well, internationally, it's about 1 per 11.
Okay.
And most people will charge at home, so you're in a situation where that's hard for you. But if you've got a driveway, like I've got an EV charger in my driveway, so I'm set. I drive back and forth to Canberra all the time.
Do you have one in Canberra too?
No, I use just the public ones or the Parliament House ones in Canberra.
Gotcha.
Yeah. But I can get to Canberra without a charge from home, but I've got to charge while I'm in Canberra. So I'll either charge at Parliament House or just go to one of the public ones and then come home. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned becoming a minister, you have to learn so much about the industry. When you come in something like energy, you've got to learn about the grid.
Yeah.
Where do you even start?
Look, when you become a new minister in anything really, in energy and climate's particularly complicated space, right? But anything really, to be fair, it's like drinking water out of a fire hose, right? It's sipping a bit of water, you imagine, and the water's gushing down the fire hose. Yeah. You've got to suck up so much information so quickly to learn about it. Sometimes you've got to make urgent decisions. You always try and say, okay, I've just got the job. If I don't need to make this decision today, I'll make it next month. You can't always do that.
We have more information.
When you got, try and get more information. But sometimes your department says to you, Minister, this is urgent. You must. I've had this in different portfolios. You must make a decision on this in the next 2 hours.
Is that where you use your gut?
Yeah. You again, 2 things: work out who you can trust for advice. Yeah. So someone, this guy really seems to make sense. I'm just going to have to. My gut says to go with his advice, and then your gut. And again, you get better at that as you go, and you make mistakes, and you learn from those mistakes.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was going to say, someone from a really basic perspective, someone that doesn't know a lot about energy, how does the Australian energy grid work?
So we have a pretty special energy. We actually have the biggest energy grid in the world, which a lot of people.
Is that because of land mass?
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and we're connected. So we've got a few grids, but say 3. We've got what's called the National Energy Market, which is the East Coast. So that's the largest energy grid in the world. That runs from the bottom of Tasmania to the top of Queensland across to South Australia.
Wow.
So in America, they don't have that. Their grid isn't as connected. And in Europe, they're not as connected. Ours is the most connected grid, which takes some management. But it's also got positives, because it means because you are connected, you can move the energy around efficiently. So people say, the wind doesn't always blow and the sun doesn't always shine. Well, part of the answer to that is, well, it normally is somewhere, right? If it's not windy in Queensland, it's probably windy in South Australia, and we're one grid. So the energy just flows to where it's needed, from where it's produced at that time to where it's needed. Now,
I didn't know that.
Yeah, our connections aren't as good as we'd like, so we're building more connections, but they're still it's still the largest grid in the world. And if you're running a small grid, that's in one sense simpler, but in the other sense, if you're running a tiny grid, say New South Wales was isolated, well, okay, well then we can't call on Victoria's solar or wind or Tasmania's hydro when we need it, and vice versa. So all in it together, Western Australia is a separate grid because it's so far away, and the Northern Territory is a separate grid again. But that East Coast grid is the biggest in the world, and there's a lot to manage because a lot of people say, well, you need to make sure you're making enough electricity for demand, and of course that's true, and we do that. But also it's got to be balanced. So one of the things that we manage is minimum demand, and more we're managing. Well, maybe we've got a bit too much electricity in the grid today.
Is that because of all the natural energy being produced?
Yeah. So if you've got solar panels on the roof and you're making your own energy in the middle of the day, you don't need to call it from the grid. So therefore, the demand's gone down, but the energy's still there. That is as big a challenge to manage as needing enough energy for the needs at any particular time, and is very common now as well. Well, it's managed, and experts and electrical engineers who are excellent at their job manage it, but it's just part of running Australia's energy system.
Because my mum got solar panels on her house, and eventually she started making money from putting energy into the grid, but now she said they charge her.
She's still better off because she's not calling on energy from the grid, so she's not paying for energy during the day. But when the system started, right, she was being paid a lot more because they needed that energy. Now so many people have solar panels. 4 million Australians now have solar panels, 4 million households. So many have it that the companies are going to pay less for it in the middle of the day because they don't need it as much because they've got so many people providing it. So that's why one of the things we need to do is work with people for more batteries, because your mum probably has solar panels but not a battery. And so if she can save her own energy during the day and not put it into the grid, but then not pay for energy at night, she'll be much better off as well. But there's a high upfront cost of batteries. So it's something that we are making progress on. So 3 years ago, one in 60 houses had a battery. Now it's 1 in 40. But 1 in 3 has solar panels, so a bit of work to do there.
Wow, I had no idea that whole grid was connected. And then if it's sunny in Queensland, they can pump that down. And does that all move at the speed of light?
Oh yeah. I mean, instantaneous. And again, it's a tribute to some great Australian expertise to set this up and connect the grids. And so there's sort of, you look at the apps, there's different prices in different states, but it's actually just one grid.
Yeah, because I was wondering, if we have private corporations but we have a national grid that does the whole area, why doesn't the government just sell the electricity?
So, I mean, the government used to be much more involved, and then about 30 years ago, a lot of state governments got out of making electricity. So now there's a mix. There are some state governments that still do, and doing a bit more, like Victoria's getting more involved in funding renewable energy. But our system is a sort of mix of government and private. We're government, where my role and the state energy minister's roles and the roles of people like our energy market operators are more rule setting and facilitating and encouraging investment, but not actually generating electricity ourselves. And, there's pros and cons of different systems, but that's the balance that we work with.
That's the way it's handed. And at the moment, what's the percent between renewables, coal, hydro?
So some really interesting figures. So just in this last quarter, so the figures come out quarterly, and a quarter is not, it's not what it looks like all year. It's a snapshot, but it's an important snapshot. And there were really interesting figures in the last quarter. So for the first time in Australian history, coal came down under 50% of our energy. So it's normally much more than 50%, and it's been coming down. And for the first time in Australian history, it's now under 50%. We've got renewables up to 46%, and the rest is gas. So soon, renewables will overtake coal, and then soon after that, renewables will break through the 50% barrier for the first time. So when we won the election, it was about a third, and soon we'll break through a half, and that is massive effort. A massive effort by the country to get from about a third to a half, and on the road then to around 80%.
Working towards 50% of Australia being done by renewables. And what brings that number up? Is it good weather, or is it building more?
With all the above, So obviously, if the conditions are good for renewables in a quarter, you can call on more. So it can be mild conditions, can be windy, can be sunny. Hydro works basically, which is the dams. That works basically whenever you need it to, providing you've got enough water, which we usually do. And then so it's a combination of, well, where's the easiest place to get supply, and where's the demand come from now? And then you're balancing again. One of the things about coal is you can't turn it off.
Is that right? Because I actually thought coal we could just reduce the amount we make so we can manage the grid.
That's one of the challenges. Once a coal-fired power station gets turned on, you can't turn it off. You can turn it down, or you can turn it up, but you can't actually turn it off because it's just such a big job to start it again. So that's one of the reasons why we need to keep going with this transition, because you've got a coal-fired power station just putting out emissions for energy we don't use and don't need at that particular time. So it's not efficient. Gas you can turn on and off, so that's really flexible. That's really useful. Nuclear you can't turn on and off, and obviously you've got different types of renewables at different times, so you're managing all the above.
Yeah. So where do we reduce power? Like, how do we stop making power to not overload the grid when it's not needed?
Well, you can, as I said, you can turn gas-fired power stations off.
Yep.
You can turn coal-fired power stations down.
Yep.
You can, in extreme, we don't like doing this. You can, in extreme, turn rooftop solar off. So you can use it for yourself, but not feed into the grid. You can increase energy use or reduce energy use. So some of the big energy users, like aluminium smelters, the operator will get on the phone to them and go, we've got plenty of energy, lock yourself out, or we're a bit tight, can you turn things down? That happens as well.
Wow. Wow. So if you have too much energy, you can actually call some of the big users and just tell them to use a bit more.
Well, they put all sorts of things. As I said, this is something I learned as minister, because you think minimum demand, I get these text messages saying, how the grid's going from the market operator and everyone. And sometimes it's we're dealing with minimum demand, and i.e. we've got a bit more electricity than you would think we might need at this particular point.
Yeah, sounds like an issue you wouldn't face in any other industry. We got too much.
Well,
too good.
It's part of the challenge.
Yeah.
Part of the challenge.
Now with nuclear, what's the problem with it?
So the problem with it is it's too expensive and takes too long. So look, there'll be some people out there who don't like it at all for moral reasons or ideological reasons, and I'm not one of them. Like, if it worked, it works for Australia, but it doesn't work for Australia for a few reasons. One, around the world, it's just very expensive to build a nuclear reactor. They're just very expensive, and they always blow out and cost a lot more than what was originally predicted, and it's predicted to cost a lot to start with.
What is the predicted cost?
About $600 a megawatt hour. So, that is very expensive, and for, I don't want to get too political, but for the opposition's plan, around $600 billion, that's a lot of money. So we're blessed in Australia that we have the best renewables in the world, best solar, best wind. Yes, it takes management, and yes, you've got to build the storage and the batteries and the, everything to go with it, but we still start with the best resources in the world. And so we'd be mad not to capture all those resources. And if you went down the nuclear road, it would be a massive distraction from getting on with the renewable job. It would be so expensive. The thing about solar and wind is they don't send a bill, right? Once you've built them, you've got the resource. The sun doesn't send a bill. The wind doesn't send an invoice. Whereas with nuclear, there's an ongoing, substantial running cost. The capital costs are very, very high to build a nuclear reactor because it is such, complicated, impressive technology, but expensive. You've got to build in extra protections for safety. I don't run the argument that nuclear is unsafe, but I do say you make it safe by spending billions to make it safer, and that's billions that we don't need to spend. And it takes too long. So, you couldn't get a nuclear reactor built in 20 years. That would be lightning speed. And in the meantime, we've got these coal-fired power generators that are running all the time, whether we need them or not. They're very unreliable.
I've heard that they're unreliable because we don't service them.
No, that's not true. I've seen that online too, and it's not true. They get serviced.
Some of the fake news?
Yeah.
I know about it.
Yeah. Yes, I know, yeah. No, the coal-fired power stations sometimes are often out being maintained, and that's how the system's meant to work, right? So they close them down for a period of weeks and maintain them. It's not true that that's why they're breaking down, so they are being maintained. They're breaking down because they're getting old. Technology doesn't get more efficient as it gets older. These power stations are, decades old. The last one that closed in Australia was 51 years old. That's a long time for a power station to work every day. And There hasn't been a day in the last 18 months where we haven't had a coal-fired power station break down. I'm not talking about being closed down for maintenance. I'm talking about breaking down one day. Just workers turning up and it not working. Not a day in the last 18 months. And that's the biggest threat to reliability in our energy system, is relying too much on that coal for too long.
And in the past, has coal been like 80, 90%?
Yeah, back in the day. Coal has served Australia very well. The coal-fired power station workers are great Australians, and the coal miners are great Australians.
So my pop was a coal miner.
Good on him, and they powered Australia for decades and decades and decades, and it's good, honourable, decent work. And apart from, the fact that we've now worked out, we didn't know at the time, but we've now worked out it's a big cause of climate change, that's why we've got to move away from it, and because they're getting older, they're breaking down a lot. But, it's served Australia very well. It's just time to move on to the newer, more efficient, lower emissions, more reliable form of energy.
So being the Minister for Climate Change and the Minister for Energy, and you've got coal making a lot of Australia's energy, what are the actual effects from a sustainability perspective?
Well, electricity is our biggest emitting sector. So Australia creates more carbon emissions from electricity than anything else. So then second is industry, and then you've got transport. So, and then, others, things like agriculture. But electricity is the big one for Australia. It's about a third. So we need to reduce emissions out of electricity if we're serious. And that is the impact of coal. It's very high emissions. And particularly as it's running all the time. And it just burns a lot of carbon. Again, we didn't know that when we were building them. We didn't know it was a problem. My predecessors, good people, doing good jobs. Climate change wasn't on the agenda 50 years ago. Now we know, though, so we've got to deal with it.
Gotcha. And with AI and data centers needing so much power, like we see Amazon, Google, a lot of the big companies investing in nuclear to get that power, how can Australia stay competitive and keep up our power needs?
So you're right in that, if you do one ChatGPT search, that uses 10 times more electricity than a Google search. One.
I've heard that much amount of water as well.
Yep, because you've got to keep the AI and the data centers cool.
But it's so good, ChatGPT.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's great. And it's not going to stop, right?
Yeah.
So it's here to stay. We've got to manage it. But it's just a statement of fact. It uses a lot of electricity and a lot of water. Now, actually, there's a lot of data centers looking to come to Australia. A lot of AI coming.
That's great.
It's great. They come through my office all the time. So it's not, some people say in the debate, they're all going offshore, they're all going to America, they're all using nuclear. No, there's plenty who want to come to Australia and use our renewable energy because it's cheap and because it's reliable, because we're a great country to do business. So you just add that in to the mix. We are going to need more electricity in Australia. That's just a statement of fact, not less. We're going to need more because EVs, and we're going to keep making aluminium and steel, and that eats a lot of electricity, and we want to make as much as we can. And AI and data centers are coming to Australia. So all that means we are going to need more electricity by 2050, not less. So it's not about cutting back. It's about finding smarter ways of doing more.
And is renewables, would they produce enough to support these data centers, these AIs?
With the right scaffolding around it. So with the right support from batteries, the right support from gas. So gas is very controversial, and maybe some of our listeners go, I don't like gas because it's emissions. Yeah, but you can turn it on and off, right?
Yeah, it sounds like a good safety at least.
Absolutely.
If the grid needs some flow.
Absolutely. Gas is very important. It's like insurance, right? You hope you don't need it very often, but you really want to know it's there.
Yeah.
And so gas plays that role. So a gas-fired power station, you can turn on and off now with 2 minutes notice. And that's why it's really important. That's why we need to keep gas in the system, because as we're building all this, it's going to take time, and there's going to be a need for gas for the foreseeable future.
Gotcha. So the plan would be to have mostly renewables.
Yes.
And gas is
backed by
backup.
gas. Okay. Absolutely.
And then slowly phase out the coal.
Yep. The coal-fired power stations, as they get older, will close. No one serious thinks we're going to build a new coal-fired power station in Australia. Some, you hear it in some of the debates sometimes, but no serious person or economist or policy person thinks that's possible. So we've got to make the new energy.
Now, with energy prices being so high, why is that?
There's a couple of reasons. Firstly, again, you see it on social media. If renewables are so cheap, why are my prices going up? Well, the true answer to that is because we don't yet have enough renewables. Because the price is set by the most expensive form of energy at the time, and that can be gas or that can be coal, right? So until we get through that 50% and up to 80%, the price is often set by the old types of energy, because that's the most expensive and that sets the price. Every step we take forward of more renewable energy puts downward pressure on prices. Then, in the middle of this transformation that we've been running, this renewable transformation, we've dealt with the war in Ukraine, and people say, oh, well, Ukraine's a long way from us. What's it got to do with us?
Yeah, how's that affect our energy if it's an internal
Well, because
grid?
it's impacted so much on the supply of gas from Russia to the world. So Russia's invaded Ukraine. Russia was one of the world's biggest sources of gas, and it's been weaponized, in the European war. And so the price of gas just went through the roof, and then the price of other things follow, and it put energy prices up. I mean, I talk to my energy minister friends around the world. We're all dealing with similar things. It's not like one country, doesn't have high energy prices at the moment. We've all been dealing with it, and things like the war in Ukraine can have a huge impact, mainly because of that Russian gas, which is just the supply just was impacted, and as you know, when the supply of something reduces, the cost of it goes up.
Supply and demand.
Absolutely.
And with Australia having so many of the minerals we need
Yes.
for batteries, I remember you said 9 out of 10,
Yep.
and we have such great stuff under our soil. How are we making sure that we can build batteries in Australia instead of just sending it all overseas?
So this is one of the great opportunities. I mentioned that we have the best renewables in the world, but we also have arguably the best critical minerals.
Oh, we're so lucky.
Absolutely. 9 out of the 10 things you need for a battery are under Australian soil. We produce around half the world's lithium, which is so necessary for batteries.
It's amazing.
It's amazing. I mean, there's not many of these in the world without Australian lithium in there somewhere. Now, what we're not doing at the moment is capturing that value for Australia. We're digging it up and shipping it out. So what we want to do is take it and refine it and process it and ultimately make batteries in Australia as well. There's a bit of that at the moment. We want to see much more of it. So we've got policies to do that. We call it Future Made in Australia. It's a big part of our economic agenda. We've got a thing called Battery Breakthrough. We've got a thing called Solar Sunshot. We've got a thing called Hydrogen Head Start, which are just subsets of that policy to say, okay, we've got all this stuff. How are we going to make sure that we're creating Australian jobs, Australian investment, Australian wealth out of the resources that we have? It makes more sense environmentally to process the lithium where it is and add the value rather than shipping it around the world. That's emissions. And it makes much, much more sense economically for Australians. So things like production tax credits and the policies that we put in place are designed. It'll take a while to work, right? It's not going to happen tomorrow because you've got to build the industry. And again, you're going to get the odd setback and the odd bump in the road because you don't build a new industry from scratch and it'll go according to the glossy document all the time.
Because that'd be great to build the battery industry in Australia
Absolutely.
and have everything here, and then we could sell them off.
We could sell them to ourselves,
Yeah.
sell them to the world. Again, there's some happening. There's great Australian companies. There's a company called Energy Renaissance, for example. I don't want to start singling one out, but they're in the Hunter.
Yeah. Close where I grew up.
Yeah, exactly. They're
Good on
employing Hunter people. They're
Yeah.
making Australian-made batteries, but we want to see much more of that.
Gotcha. And with companies like, I've heard Santos pay nearly nothing in tax. Why is that? Is it because they create a lot of jobs, that they get tax reductions? Like, the numbers are low, but
Yeah.
why?
Well, I mean, obviously, I can't go into individual companies' tax
Just in
situation, but in general. So we know there's an issue there. That's why we and Jim Chalmers as Treasurer changed the tax rules for gas and are going to make around $2 billion extra over the 4-year period out of gas taxes. Again, that was controversial. That was the Treasurer, not me, running that, but it was a big call for him, and he went into a fight to do it. And again, you get all sides. You get the gas companies saying, this is outrageous, and you get people saying, well, this doesn't go far enough. So So you get other people saying it doesn't go far enough, so I don't support it. Well, you've got to strike the balance. But it is Australian gas, and Australian taxpayers should benefit from it. That's why he changed the rules, so that we get more national benefit out of that. And I think a lot of people, frankly, that didn't get as much attention as maybe it did, as it should have, when we made that call to change those rules.
Yeah, because you want to make sure that every Australian benefits from minerals that we have under our soil. And it wasn't until Punters Politics, you may have heard of him, pointed it out. I didn't even know.
Yep.
But it sounds like a lot of the stuff's being taken and not much given back to Australia. And then you got places in Norway where they, create that fund that supports everyone.
Part of it is, to be honest, you look at things and go, well, maybe we were doing things 40 years ago. We might have changed the rules a bit earlier and done things differently, but we weren't. So the second best time is today.
Certainly.
Right? Yeah. So you just get on with it. But then when you're doing it today, you do have to be careful of, making sure that you're changing the rules fairly, that investments that were made under certain rules are protected. But, $2 billion extra is not a small amount of money that our changes will get from that.
Certainly. And when it comes to mining, because it's so good for the country. I know mining has a lot of negative support from the environment, but mining's important for Australia. Are you a big supporter of mining and digging up these minerals?
And we're going to need more of it. I mean, mining's got a great future in Australia. It'll change what we mine and where we mine it and how we mine it. All that changes, but Australia will be a mining country forever because that lithium's not going to get itself out of the ground, right? So, and nor are the other 9 out of 10 critical minerals. And we're going to need. It's going to take some time to get off coal, and the rest of the world off coal too. So that's going to be there for a while yet too. So, I'm a big supporter of the mining industry. Again, it changes, and some people say, oh well, how can you be an environmentalist and a miner? No, we need mining to make this transition work.
Because we even need the metals to build the windmills. We need the metals for the batteries for the electric cars. Like we need the mining to support all of our industries. And I think if we can become a wealthier country from it.
There's a lot of steel in a wind turbine. There's a lot of aluminium. I want as much of that as possible made in Australia. And then as you said, and the lithium and the other critical minerals, they're not going to get themselves out of the ground. We need Australians getting them out and adding value and creating wealth as we go.
And with over 21 years in politics, have you seen Australia get better throughout those 21 years?
Yeah, we have made big improvements in a lot of things. When I think about the economic growth that we've had over the last 30 years, that's taken a lot of people out of poverty and turned a lot of aspiration into reality. And if I think about things like our superannuation system, more and more people are living a dignified retirement. When I was a boy, a lot of old people were doing it very, very tough, and of course some still are. But you've got more and more people with their own wealth created by superannuation, which I'm very proud of as a creation of my side of politics. But we're not perfect. I mean, there's things that worry me. I look at the fact that reports of depression and anxiety have doubled in Australians under 35.
Why do you think that is?
Well, look, some of it, I hope, is better diagnosis and talking about it more. So some people were depressed when I was a boy and didn't talk about it. You hit it. You did. It was just, it wasn't accepted to talk about it. If you're depressed, it was like, well, get over it, mate.
Like toughen up.
Toughen up.
Yeah.
It just
wasn't good, though, that people are coming forward.
So it's much better that we talk about it, and it's much better that it's more diagnosed. But I suspect that's not the only thing. Like, again, I don't want to sound like an old man talking about when I was a boy all the time, but, when I was a kid, if you got bullied at school, it finished at 3 o'clock. You got home, and you knew you were free of the bullies. Now they follow you home on your mobile phone, follow you home on Instagram or Snapchat. They can keep the barrage of abuse coming. And I really worry about mental health of young people. And that's why, I know there'll be mixed views amongst our listeners, but that's why the social media changed for under 16s.
That's what I was going to ask, like the social media ban for under 16s.
Yeah, like let people be kids for a while before they have to deal with that. Social media is wonderful. I'm on it. I love it. But let's not pretend it's all one-way traffic and not perfect, and it hasn't contributed to some of the problems we're dealing with. And I worry about young people, and I worry about those anxiety rates. And it's not all social media's fault, I'm not saying.
Will we keep like YouTube? Because I learned so much on YouTube growing up. I used it as a platform that probably shaped me.
Yeah, and look, YouTube's great. And, the rules have been designed pretty carefully to ensure that people get access to, things like that. But it's designed to make life easier. Frankly, for parents, you've got a 14-year-old hassling mum and dad, I've got to get Snapchat, I've got to get Instagram, and they don't want to do it.
Snapchat can be dangerous, I feel, for young kids. Like, I remember when I was on it as a kid, and people would say things they wouldn't normally say because they thought it just disappeared.
Well, you think you're anonymous, or, it doesn't count because you're not saying to your face, but it can have you're sitting at home in your bedroom at 5 o'clock getting messages that aren't very nice on Snapchat, and you're in your room by yourself, parents aren't there. It can have a very big impact. So that worries me. So I think, over the last 20 years, yes, there's a lot of things we've got right in Australia, but there's a lot of challenges. And in my space, natural disasters now are increasingly unnatural, more frequent, floods, fires, more often, worse, and that's climate change. They're not natural disasters anymore. So that's why we do what we do.
The social media stuff, because I'm in it. Like that's my whole space, and a lot of people ask me about what I think about the ban and different things. So the idea is to stop 16-year-olds on some social media platforms, but not all. Like YouTube, some of them will be safe.
Yeah. My understanding is YouTube is dealt with differently because it is educational.
Yep.
You know, it's got, again, there's things. You can go down a rabbit hole on YouTube, you know, but it is dealt with differently because the government has recognised, and in consultation with the opposition, to be fair, that there are differences. Not every platform is the same.
They'd never take away things like games, like Fortnite. No. Is my Fortnite good?
No, I think your game's pretty safe.
Okay. Have you ever played Fortnite?
I can't say that I'm an expert, no. I have sort of seen it in the house, but and I might have dabbled at it, but I'm not very good at it.
Never got in the dark?
No. I know what I'm good at and know what I'm not, and video games are not what I'm good at.
They're not yet. And finally, what's your vision for Australia? And provide with the election coming up, like what were you happy you achieved in this term, and what would you like to achieve in the next if you guys are re-elected?
Well, maybe the last bit first. We've done a lot, but there's a lot more to do.
Yeah.
You know, we talked about some of it. We've made a good start, but it's not done yet. And climate change is so important for our future. And if we get it right, the dividends for Australia are massive. If we get it wrong, the next generation is going to pay the price. So that's what keeps me going. That's the why. You know, you asked a bit about leadership before. For leadership, you've got to ask yourself the why. Why am I doing this? The how comes later, and the what comes later. Why? Climate change is the why. Gets me out of bed every day to say this is a big deal for the future. After I'm gone, people will be dealing with it. And so, yes, it's hard, and yes, you get criticism in the newspaper, and yes, you know, people say this is no good, and I call it all too hardism. It's very easy to do, all too hardism.
Easy to say no.
Easy to say no. Easy to find the problem with something. That's the easiest thing in the world. The harder thing, but the better thing, is to say, yeah, this is hard, but it's not too hard. So we're going to keep going. So that's what the next 3 or 4 years means for me. Okay, made a good start. Haven't done it all yet. A lot more to do. Done a lot more to do. In terms of Australia, best country in the world, but I want it to be even better. I think that's what a true patriot thinks.
Yeah.
Got a great country, but could be better. That's what gets you out of bed every day. So things aren't perfect. We're a great country, but we're not perfect. So if you really love your country, you try and make it better every day. And that's the way I see it. So let's make it better. Better for future generations, so we pass on something better to the next guys. More opportunity. A country where you can grow to be whatever you want to be. And if you're the son of a brain surgeon on the North Shore or the daughter of a single parent in Fairfield, it doesn't matter. You get a shot at life. That's my vision for Australia. That's what we're going to keep going for.
I appreciate the Honourable Chris Bowen. Thank you for your time. Thank you for coming on.
And congratulations to you for everything you're doing in this podcast, mate. It's a really good chance for people to hear different perspectives, and I know it's not easy, and you do a great job at it.
I appreciate that. Thank you.